Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stepped out of the transport vehicle into the blazing heat of Fort Braxton, North Carolina, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her orders clutched in her free hand. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling military installation, casting long shadows from the concrete buildings that housed the 3rd Special Operations Command. The air was thick with humidity and the distant sound of artillery training, a constant reminder that this wasn't just another assignment. This was the proving ground for the military's most elite tactical units. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 28, Sarah had already spent 8 years in the Army, working her way up from enlisted ranks through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to think 3 steps ahead of any situation. Her service record was spotless, her tactical scores consistently in the top percentile, and her leadership evaluations praised her ability to inspire troops under the most challenging circumstances. Yet as she approached the intimidating entrance to the Special Operations Command headquarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that none of that would matter here. The building loomed before her like a fortress, its reinforced concrete walls and narrow windows designed more for security than comfort. Guard towers flanked the entrance, manned by soldiers whose eyes tracked every movement with professional scrutiny. This was where the military's most classified operations were planned and executed, where decisions made in windowless rooms could shift the balance of power across continents. Sarah had dreamed of this assignment for years, but now that she was here, the weight of expectation pressed down on her like a physical force. Her boots echoed against the polished floors as she navigated the maze of corridors leading to the personnel office. Other officers moved through the hallways with purpose, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed her presence. She caught fragments of whispered exchanges, discussions about upcoming deployments, intelligence assessments, and the kind of high-stakes missions that never appeared in public military reports. The atmosphere was electric with tension and ambition, a place where careers were made or destroyed, based on split-second decisions and unwavering competence. The personnel office was a study in military efficiency, with metal desks arranged in perfect rows and filing cabinets that reached from floor to ceiling. Behind the main desk sat Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes, a career soldier whose weathered face and multiple deployment ribbons told the story of decades spent in the world's most dangerous locations. He looked up from his paperwork with the kind of professional indifference that came from processing hundreds of new arrivals over the years. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said, consulting his computer screen, "welcome to Fort Braxton. You're here for assignment to the 47th Tactical Intelligence Unit." Sarah nodded, handing over her orders. "Yes, Sergeant. I'm ready to begin immediately." Hayes scanned the documents with practiced efficiency, his expression revealing nothing about what he was reading. The 47th TIU was legendary within military circles, a small, elite unit responsible for gathering and analyzing intelligence in the most contested regions of the world. Their work directly influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels of government, and their success rate was a closely guarded secret that spoke to their exceptional capabilities. "Your predecessor, Captain Williams, was reassigned to the Pentagon last month," Hayes explained, filing her paperwork in a secure cabinet. "The unit's been operating under temporary leadership while headquarters decided on a permanent replacement. You'll be briefed by Colonel Thompson in 20 minutes. As Sarah waited in the outer office, she observed the steady stream of personnel moving through the facility. These weren't typical soldiers. They moved with the quiet confidence of individuals who had seen combat in places that didn't appear on most maps. Their uniforms bore the subtle insignia of special operations units, airborne divisions, and intelligence services. This was the military's intellectual elite, the strategists and tacticians who turned raw information into actionable intelligence. The door to Colonel Thompson's office opened, and a tall man in his 50s emerged, his bearing reflecting decades of command experience. Colonel James Thompson was a legend in intelligence circles, known for his ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. His penetrating gaze swept the waiting area before settling on Sarah, and she felt the weight of his assessment in that brief moment. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Come in." Thompson's office was a testament to his career walls lined with commendations, photographs from deployments across the globe, and maps marked with locations that represented victories won through superior intelligence and tactical planning. He settled behind his desk, gesturing for Sarah to take the chair across from him. "I've reviewed your file," he began, opening a folder that contained her complete service record. "Impressive academic credentials, exemplary performance reviews, and a talent for strategic thinking that your instructors found remarkable. Your work on the insurgency analysis in the Middle East caught attention at the highest levels." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be considered for this assignment." Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying her with calculating eyes. "The 47th TU operates differently than conventional units, Lieutenant. We don't just gather intelligence, we synthesize it, analyze it, and present strategic recommendations that influence policy at the national level. The work requires not just tactical knowledge but strategic vision." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I'll be frank with you. There were concerns about your appointment. Some members of the senior staff questioned whether someone with your background and experience level was ready for the responsibilities that come with leading this unit." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her composure. She had faced skepticism throughout her career, colleagues who questioned whether she belonged in rooms where critical decisions were made. The pattern was always the same: initial doubt followed by grudging respect once her capabilities became apparent. But this felt different, more consequential. "What specific concerns, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Age, primarily. At 28, you're younger than anyone who's previously commanded this unit. There's also the matter of your rapid promotion through the ranks. Some view it as too much, too fast." Sarah met his gaze directly. "With respect, sir, my age hasn't prevented me from outperforming officers with twice my experience. The strategic assessments I've provided have been consistently accurate, and my tactical recommendations have saved lives and resources." "I'm aware of your record," Thompson replied. "That's why you're here. But leading the 47th TIU requires more than analytical skills. You'll be managing a team of intelligence specialists, coordinating with multiple agencies, and briefing senior commanders on matters of national security. The margin for error is non-existent." The colonel stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds where soldiers were conducting advanced tactical exercises. "The unit you're inheriting has a proud tradition. They've provided intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks, identified enemy capabilities before they could be deployed, and supported operations that most of the world will never know about. That legacy comes with enormous responsibility." Sarah watched him carefully, sensing that this conversation was as much a test as it was a briefing. "I understand the gravity of the assignment, sir. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe I could meet those responsibilities." Thompson returned to his desk, pulling out another file marked with security classifications. "Your first assignment will be challenging. We've received intelligence indicating unusual activity in the Corvanian region troop movements, supply chain disruptions, and communications patterns that suggest something significant is being planned. The Pentagon needs answers." Corvana was a strategically critical region where multiple international interests converged, making it a flashpoint for potential conflicts. Any major military action there could have global implications, affecting everything from energy supplies to international trade routes. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized the scope of what was being asked of her. "How much time do I have?" she asked. 2 weeks for your initial assessment. The unit is expecting you to hit the ground running. There's no grace period for getting acquainted with your new responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, Thompson walked her to the door. "Lieutenant, I want you to succeed. The 47th TU needs strong leadership, and your analytical skills are exactly what we're looking for. But you should know that not everyone shares my confidence in your appointment." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken message. She would need to prove herself not just to her superiors, but to the team she would be leading. The weight of skepticism would follow her into every meeting, every briefing, every decision she made. The walk to the 47th TIU's headquarters building took her through the heart of the base, past training facilities where soldiers practiced urban warfare scenarios and special operations techniques. The contrast between the routine training exercises and the classified intelligence work she was about to undertake was stark. While other units prepared for known threats, her team would be trying to identify dangers that hadn't yet materialized. Intelligence building was smaller than the main command center, but no less imposing. Security checkpoints required multiple forms of identification, and the hallways were lined with secure communication equipment and restricted access areas. Sarah's new office was on the 3rd floor, adjacent to the main analytical workspace where her team would spend their days, turning raw data into actionable intelligence. As she unpacked her belongings, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Growing up in a military family, she had always understood that service meant more than just following orders. It meant taking responsibility for outcomes that affected people's lives. Her father, a career Marine, had taught her that leadership wasn't about authority, but about earning the trust of those who depended on your decisions. The academic path had come naturally to her. A scholarship to West Point, followed by graduate studies in international relations and strategic studies. While her peers focused on traditional military specialties, Sarah had been drawn to the intellectual challenges of intelligence analysis. She saw patterns where others saw randomness, connections where others saw isolated events. Her first assignment had been with a conventional intelligence unit in Germany, where she had quickly distinguished herself by identifying a network of arms dealers that other analysts had missed. The success had led to a series of increasingly complex assignments, each one building her reputation as someone who could see the bigger picture while managing the smallest details. But this assignment was different. For the first time, she wouldn't just be contributing to someone else's analysis, she would be responsible for the entire intelligence picture. The decisions her team made would influence strategy at the highest levels of government, and any mistakes would have consequences that extended far beyond her own career. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. A young sergeant entered, carrying a stack of classified briefing materials. "Lieutenant Martinez? I'm Sergeant Lisa Chun, your administrative assistant. These are the current intelligence files you'll need to review before tomorrow's team meeting." Sarah accepted the materials, noting the serious expression on Chun's face. "Thank you, Sergeant. What's the team's current status?" Chun hesitated for a moment. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Always. The team's been without permanent leadership for 6 weeks. They're highly skilled, but they're also protective of their methods and suspicious of change. They've been wondering what kind of officer headquarters they would send to replace Captain Williams." Sarah appreciated the honesty. "What was Captain Williams like?" "Respected, ma'am. He had 15 years of intelligence experience and knew how to navigate both the analytical requirements and the political pressures. The team trusted his judgment completely." The implication was clear: Sarah would be stepping into shoes that many believed she couldn't fill. The comparison to her predecessor would be constant, and any mistakes would be magnified by the perception that she was unprepared for the responsibility. "I understand," Sarah said. "I'll need to earn their trust, just like any leader would." Chun nodded respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. The team meeting is scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. They'll be expecting you to outline your approach to the Corvanian situation." As evening approached, Sarah found herself alone in her office, surrounded by intelligence reports and analytical frameworks that would determine how she approached her first major assignment. The Corvanian situation was more complex than she had initially realized. Multiple factions with conflicting interests, a history of regional conflicts that created unpredictable alliance patterns, and economic factors that could influence military decisions in unexpected ways. The intelligence indicated that something significant was building in the region, but the patterns were subtle and contradictory. Traditional analytical methods would take weeks to produce actionable conclusions, time that might not be available if the situation escalated quickly. Sarah realized that she would need to develop new approaches, ways of processing information that could accelerate the analytical timeline without sacrificing accuracy. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mentor, Colonel Patricia Reeves, who had guided her through the early stages of her career. "Heard about your new assignment. Remember, trust your instincts but verify everything. The best intelligence officers are those who can balance intuition with rigorous analysis." Sarah smiled, appreciating the reminder. Throughout her career, she had learned to trust her ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. But she had also learned that intuition without supporting evidence was just speculation. The key was finding the balance between rapid analysis and thorough verification. The next morning would bring her first meeting with the team that would either become her greatest asset or her most significant challenge. She had spent the night reviewing their individual files, understanding their specialties and personalities. They were exceptional analysts, each with expertise in different aspects of intelligence gathering and strategic assessment. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres specialized in signals intelligence, with an uncanny ability to identify communication patterns that revealed operational planning. Sergeant First Class Jennifer Walsh was an expert in human intelligence, skilled at analyzing behavioral indicators and social dynamics that influenced military decisions. Corporal David Kim focused on technical intelligence, understanding weapon systems and technological capabilities that shaped tactical possibilities. Together, they formed a formidable analytical team. The question was whether they would accept her leadership and embrace the innovative approaches she planned to implement. Sarah understood that her success would depend not just on her own capabilities but on her ability to harness the collective expertise of her team while pushing them to think beyond conventional analytical frameworks. As she prepared for what would be the most important meeting of her career, Sarah reflected on the skepticism she had already encountered and the challenges that lay ahead. The doubters believed that her youth and rapid promotion made her unprepared for the responsibilities of command. They saw her appointment as a risk rather than an opportunity. But Sarah had faced skepticism before, and she had learned that the best response was not words, but results. Tomorrow would begin the process of proving that leadership wasn't about age or experience alone. It was about vision, determination, and the ability to inspire others to achieve more than they thought possible. The lights of Fort Braxton twinkled in the darkness outside her window, a reminder that she was now part of an institution dedicated to protecting national security through superior intelligence and strategic thinking. Somewhere in the maze of buildings and training facilities, decisions were being made that would shape the course of international events. And starting tomorrow, she would be responsible for providing the intelligence that informed those decisions. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, but Sarah felt ready for the challenge. She had spent years preparing for this moment, developing the skills and knowledge that would allow her to succeed where others expected her to fail. The skeptics had given her something valuable, the motivation to prove them wrong, and the determination to exceed even her own expectations. As she finally closed the intelligence files and prepared to leave her office, Sarah caught her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back at her was no longer the uncertain lieutenant who had arrived at Fort Braxton that morning. She was a leader ready to take on the most challenging assignment of her career, armed with the confidence that came from knowing she had earned her place through merit and determination. The transformation had begun. The conference room fell silent as Sarah entered at precisely 0800 hours, her footsteps echoing off the polished concrete floor. The 47th Tactical Intelligence Unit's main briefing room was a study in functional design, reinforced walls lined with secure communication equipment, multiple projection screens capable of displaying classified materials, and a central table. Surrounded by chairs that had hosted some of the military's most consequential strategic discussions, her team was already assembled, their expressions carefully neutral as they assessed their new commanding officer. The dynamic was immediately apparent. These were seasoned professionals who had worked together for years, united by shared experiences and mutual respect. Sarah was the outsider, the unknown quantity who would either enhance their capabilities or disrupt their established methods. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres sat at the far end of the table, his laptop open to what Sarah recognized as a signals intelligence analysis platform. His reputation for identifying communication patterns that revealed enemy operational planning was legendary within intelligence circles. Next to him, Sergeant First Class Jennifer Walsh reviewed human intelligence reports with the focused intensity of someone who understood that behavioral analysis could mean the difference between successful and failed operations. Corporal David Keem occupied the chair closest to the technical displays, surrounded by tablet computers and analysis tools that helped him decode weapon systems and technological capabilities. His young face belied an expertise in technical intelligence that had contributed to several classified successes over the past 2 years. "Good morning," Sarah began, moving to the head of the table with confident strides. "I'm Lieutenant Martinez, and I'm honored to be leading this unit. I've reviewed your individual files and your collective achievements over the past 3 years. Your work has directly influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels of government." Torres looked up from his laptop, his expression skeptical. "Ma'am, with respect, Captain Williams always started our meetings by reviewing current intelligence priorities. We have active monitoring requirements that need immediate attention." The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah recognized it as a test of her leadership approach. Would she defer to established procedures or assert her own methods? The room's atmosphere grew tense as everyone waited for her response. "You're absolutely right, Sergeant Torres. But before we dive into current operations, I want to understand how this team approaches complex analytical challenges. The Corvanian situation is unlike anything we've faced recently, and I need to know our capabilities before I can determine the best strategic approach." Walsh leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Ma'am, what specific aspects of the Corvanian situation concern you most?" "The preliminary reports suggest increased military activity, but the patterns are inconsistent with typical pre-conflict preparations." Sarah felt a spark of satisfaction. Walsh was engaging with the analytical challenge rather than simply defending established procedures. "That's exactly what caught my attention. The intelligence indicates significant military buildup, but the deployment patterns don't match conventional strategic doctrine. Something else is driving these movements." Kim's fingers flew across his tablet as he pulled up technical analysis reports. "The weapons systems being moved into the region are interesting, ma'am. They're not configured for traditional territorial defense or offensive operations. The missile systems are primarily surface-to-air, And the armor deployments are concentrated in areas that don't control key strategic terrain. Sarah moved to the main display screen, connecting her secure tablet. To project a map of the Corvanian region. This is what I've been thinking about all night. If we overlay the troop movements with the weapons deployments and communication intercepts, we get a picture that doesn't make sense using conventional analytical frameworks. Torres closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. What do? You mean, ma'am? Look at the timeline, Sarah said, highlighting different data points on the map. The initial movements began 6 weeks ago, but they weren't coordinated as a single operation. Different units moved independently, following separate command structures. The surface-to-air missiles were deployed first, followed by armor units. That took defensive positions rather than offensive staging areas. The team studied the display with growing interest. Sarah could see the moment when they began to understand her analytical approach. Instead of looking for patterns that confirmed existing theories, she was allowing the data to suggest new possibilities. They're not preparing for an offensive operation, Walsh said slowly, her expertise in human behavior analysis contributing to the emerging picture. The deployment patterns suggest they're expecting to be attacked, not planning to attack, but by whom? Kim asked, his technical perspective, adding another layer to the analysis. The missile systems are configured for high-altitude intercepts, not ground-level threats. They're expecting air attacks from sophisticated aircraft, not regional rivals with limited air power. Sarah nodded, feeling the energy in the room shift, as her team began to embrace the analytical challenge. That's the key question. If Corvanian forces are preparing for aerial threats that their regional neighbors can't deliver, then we need to understand what they know that we don't. Torres reopened his laptop, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. Ma'am, I've been monitoring communications intercepts from the region. The message traffic increased dramatically 3 weeks ago, but the content has been heavily encrypted. Standard decryption methods haven't been successful. What about the communication patterns themselves? Sarah asked. Sometimes the metadata tells us more than the actual content. Torres's expression brightened as he understood her approach. The frequency and timing of messages suggest coordinated planning, but the origination points are unusual. Messages are being sent from locations that don't correspond to known military installations or government facilities. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of analytical breakthrough beginning to build. Show me the geographic distribution of these communication nodes. The map display shifted to show communication intercepts as colored dots scattered across the Corvanian region. The pattern was immediately apparent. The nodes formed a network that extended beyond Corvanian borders, connecting to facilities in 3 neighboring countries. This isn't just a Corvanian operation, Walsh observed, her behavioral analysis expertise allowing her to read the implications. The communication network suggests a coalition of some kind, but the countries involved have historically been rivals. Kim pulled up technical specifications on his tablet. Ma'am, I'm seeing references to equipment deliveries that don't match any known Corvanian military procurement. The technical specifications mention systems that are still in development by major defense contractors. Sarah stepped back from the display, her mind processing the interconnected pieces of information. We're looking at something unprecedented. A coalition of former rivals coordinating defensive preparations against aerial threats, using equipment that's not yet officially deployed. The question is, what do they know that's prompting this level of cooperation? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a routine intelligence analysis. They were uncovering evidence of a situation that could reshape regional power dynamics and potentially affect global security. Ma'am, Torres said carefully, if your analysis is correct, then we're dealing with intelligence that goes beyond routine strategic planning. This suggests advanced knowledge of threats that haven't been publicly identified. Sarah nodded grimly. which means either their intelligence capabilities are far more advanced than we've estimated, or they're receiving information from sources we haven't identified. Walsh's expression grew troubled. The behavioral pattern suggests genuine fear, rather than opportunistic military positioning. The coalition formation indicates they believe the threat is existential, not merely strategic. How much time do we have to develop a comprehensive assessment? Kim asked, his technical mind already working through the analytical requirements. Sarah consulted her mission timeline. 12 days to provide initial findings to Colonel Thompson. But given what we're uncovering, I think we need to accelerate our analysis and provide preliminary warnings before the formal deadline. Torres leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Ma'am, with respect, this level of analysis requires resources and access that might exceed our current authorization levels. We may need to coordinate with other intelligence agencies. I've been thinking about that, Sarah replied. But first, I want to see how far we can push our current capabilities. I have some ideas about analytical approaches that might give us breakthrough insights without requiring additional resources. She moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker and beginning to sketch out a framework that combined traditional intelligence analysis with innovative data correlation techniques. Instead of analyzing each intelligence stream separately, we're going to create a dynamic model that updates in real time as new information becomes available. The team exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting both interest and skepticism. This was clearly a departure from established analytical methods, but Sarah's confidence was compelling. The key is to treat the intelligence streams as interconnected rather than independent. She continued, drawing connections between different data points. Torres, your signals intelligence provides timing and coordination data. Walsh, your human intelligence gives us behavioral motivations. Kim, your technical analysis tells us about capabilities and limitations. By combining these streams dynamically, we can identify patterns that wouldn't be visible using conventional approaches. Torres studied the framework with growing enthusiasm. This could work, ma'am, but it requires computational resources and analytical software that we don't currently have access to. Sarah smiled, revealing the first hint of her innovative approach. Actually, we do. The base's secure computing facility has analysis platforms that were originally designed for different applications. With some creative reconfiguration, we can adapt them for intelligence fusion. Kim's eyes lit up with understanding. You're talking about using the tactical simulation systems for strategic intelligence analysis. That single quotes S. Actually brilliant. The computational power is there, and the security protocols are already in place. Exactly. But it requires us to think differently about how we approach the analytical process. Instead of following linear analysis paths, we'll be creating multidimensional models that evolve as new data becomes available. Walsh nodded slowly. This could give us analytical capabilities that exceed anything in the current intelligence community. But it also means we'll be responsible for validating approaches that haven't been tested in operational environments. Sarah felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. That's the risk we take when we push boundaries. But given the potential implications of what we're uncovering, I believe the risk is justified. The meeting continued for another hour as they developed specific approaches for implementing Sarah's analytical framework. Torres would adapt his signals intelligence monitoring to provide real-time data feeds. Walsh would expand her human intelligence analysis to include behavioral prediction models. Kim would configure the technical systems to support dynamic data correlation. As the team prepared to leave, Torres approached Sarah with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal curiosity. Ma'am, can I ask where you developed these analytical approaches? They're not part of standard intelligence training. Sarah hesitated, weighing how much to reveal about her unconventional background. I've always been interested in how different analytical disciplines can complement each other. My graduate work involved studying pattern recognition across multiple domains: economics, behavioral psychology, systems analysis. I started wondering if intelligence analysis could benefit from similar interdisciplinary approaches. That's innovative thinking, Walsh observed. Most intelligence officers specialize in narrow domains. Your approach requires understanding multiple analytical frameworks simultaneously. It also requires a team willing to experiment with unproven methods, Sarah replied. I can't implement these approaches without your expertise and cooperation. Kim gathered his equipment with obvious enthusiasm. Ma'am, I think this could revolutionize how we approach complex intelligence challenges. If we can prove the effectiveness of dynamic correlation analysis, it could be adopted across the entire intelligence community. As her team departed to begin their individual preparations, Sarah remained in the conference room, studying the analytical framework she had outlined on the whiteboard. The ambitious scope of what they were attempting was both exhilarating and terrifying. Success would validate innovative approaches to intelligence analysis and potentially provide critical insights into a situation that threatened regional stability. Failure would confirm the skeptics' doubts about her readiness for command responsibility. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Thompson requesting a progress update. Sarah realized that she was about to commit to an analytical approach that had never been tested in operational conditions. With a team that had worked together for less than 2 hours, on a timeline that allowed no room for error, the next few days would determine whether her unconventional leadership style and innovative analytical methods could produce results that justified the risks she was taking. The Corvanian situation was growing more complex with each new piece of intelligence, and traditional analytical approaches were proving inadequate for understanding the emerging threat patterns. Sarah picked up her tablet and began drafting her first progress report to Colonel Thompson. She chose her words carefully, emphasizing the analytical breakthroughs her team had achieved, while acknowledging the innovative methods they were employing. The report would be her first formal communication as a unit commander, and she understood that its reception would influence how much latitude she would have for implementing her unorthodox approaches. As she worked, Sarah reflected on the morning's meeting and the subtle shift in her team's attitude. They had begun with skepticism about her leadership, but ended with genuine enthusiasm for the analytical challenges ahead. The transformation hadn't been immediate or complete, but it represented progress toward the kind of collaborative relationship that would be essential for success. The real test would come when they began implementing the dynamic correlation analysis and attempting to process intelligence streams in ways that had never been tried before. Sarah knew that the next few days would either establish her credibility as an innovative leader or confirm the doubts that had surrounded her appointment. Outside her office window, the sun was rising over Fort Braxton, casting long shadows across the training facilities where soldiers prepared for conventional military challenges. But inside the intelligence building, Sarah and her team were preparing to tackle threats that existed at the intersection of technology, strategy, and human behavior, challenges that required new ways of thinking and the courage to abandon established methods in favor of unproven innovations. The transformation of the 47th Tactical Intelligence Unit had begun, and Sarah was determined to prove that leadership wasn't about following established procedures, but about having the vision to see new possibilities and the courage to pursue them. The secure phone rang at 0347 hours, jolting Sarah from restless sleep. She had been dreaming of burning buildings and screaming civilians, the same nightmare that had haunted her for 3 years. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the encrypted handset, muscle memory from countless emergency calls during her previous assignment still sharp, despite the time that had passed. Lieutenant Martinez, this is Colonel Thompson. I need you in my office immediately. We have a situation. Sarah was already reaching for her uniform as she responded, "On my way, sir." The corridors of Fort Braxton were eerily quiet at this hour, illuminated only by emergency lighting and the occasional patrol. Sarah's footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as she made her way to the command building, her mind racing through possibilities. Emergency calls before dawn usually meant that intelligence had been compromised, operations had gone wrong, or threats had materialized faster than anyone had anticipated. Thompson's office was bustling with activity despite the early hour, secure. Communication equipment lined the walls. Multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds, and several senior officers she didn't recognize were huddled around a central table covered with classified documents. The tension in the room was palpable. This wasn't a routine briefing, but a crisis response. "Martinez, thank God you're here," Thompson said, looking up from a secure terminal. "We've got a developing situation that requires immediate analysis." 3 hours ago, satellite imagery detected massive explosions in the Corvanian border region. Initial reports suggest coordinated strikes against the defensive positions your team identified. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The defensive preparations they had been analyzing weren't theoretical. They had been responding to an actual imminent threat. "What's the current tactical situation, sir?" "Fluid and deteriorating rapidly," replied General Patricia Hawkins, whom Sarah recognized as the commander of Special Operations Command. "The coalition forces your team identified are under heavy assault from aircraft that our intelligence services didn't know existed. The attacking force is using stealth technology and weapon systems that shouldn't be operational for another 5 years." Sarah moved to the central display, studying the real-time imagery with growing alarm. The coordination and precision of the attack suggested advanced planning and intelligence capabilities that far exceeded what any known adversary possessed. "Sir, have we identified the attacking force?" Thompson's expression was grim. "That's the problem. The aircraft signatures don't match any known military inventory. We're dealing with technology that appears to be a generation ahead of anything in current deployment." General Hawkins approached Sarah directly. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed your preliminary analysis of the Corvanian situation. Your team identified defensive preparations that our other intelligence units missed entirely. Right now you may be the only analyst who understands what we're actually facing." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical force. "Ma'am, our analysis is still preliminary. We've identified patterns but haven't confirmed the underlying threat assessment." "The threat assessment is confirming itself," Thompson interjected, pointing to the live satellite feed. "The question is whether your analytical methods can help us understand what comes next." Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind processing the implications of what she was seeing. The attacking aircraft were operating in coordinated formations that suggested sophisticated command and control systems. Their weapons were precisely targeted to neutralize specific defensive capabilities rather than causing maximum destruction. This wasn't random violence, it was strategic dismantling of military infrastructure. "General, I need to bring my team in immediately. The dynamic correlation analysis we've been developing might be the only way to process this information quickly. Enough to be useful." Hawkins nodded, authorization granted. "But I need to know what makes you confident that unconventional analytical methods will work in this situation." Sarah hesitated, knowing that her answer would reveal aspects of her background that she had hoped to keep private. "Ma'am, I've dealt with similar analytical challenges before. 3 years ago, I was part of a joint intelligence task force that investigated coordinated attacks using advanced technology. The conventional analytical methods failed because the attackers were using capabilities that weren't supposed to exist." The room fell silent as the implications of her statement registered. Thompson leaned forward, his expression intense. "You're talking about the Meridian City incident?" Sarah's chest tightened as memories she had tried to suppress came flooding back. Yes, sir. General Hawkins studied Sarah with new interest. The Meridian City incident was classified at the highest levels. The official report stated that the attacks were carried out by unknown terrorist organizations using conventional weapons. The official reports were incomplete, Sarah said quietly. The attacking force used aircraft that demonstrated stealth capabilities and precision targeting that exceeded anything in the inventory. The weapons caused structural damage patterns that were inconsistent with conventional explosives. Thompson pulled up a classified file on his secure terminal. Lieutenant, your service record shows a 6-month gap 3 years ago, followed by reassignment to routine intelligence duties. The classification levels on your personnel file during that period are beyond my access authorization. Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. The Meridian City incident had been the defining experience of her career. The moment when her analytical capabilities had been both proven and cursed. She had identified the threat patterns weeks before the attacks, but her warnings had been dismissed as theoretical speculation by senior officers who couldn't accept that their understanding of enemy capabilities was fundamentally flawed. Sir, I was part of a specialized task force investigating anomalous intelligence patterns in urban environments. We identified coordination between groups that were supposed to be enemies, technical capabilities that didn't match known procurement, records and communication patterns that suggested external command and control. General Hawkins's expression grew more serious. What happened to your warnings? They were filed as interesting theoretical analysis, but not actionable intelligence. The attack occurred 72 hours after I submitted my final threat assessment. The room fell into uncomfortable silence as the implications became clear. Sarah had experienced the nightmare scenario that every intelligence analyst feared, identifying a genuine threat, only to have it dismissed by superiors who couldn't accept uncomfortable realities. How many casualties? Thompson asked quietly. 47. Civilians killed, over 200 injured. The attackers demonstrated capabilities that forced a complete reassessment of threat analysis procedures across multiple agencies. Sarah paused, gathering the courage to continue. The worst part wasn't the casualties, it was realizing that conventional, analytical frameworks were inadequate for understanding asymmetric threats. Everything I had been trained to do, every procedure I had learned, was based on assumptions that were no longer valid. General Hawkins nodded with understanding. And that's why you developed alternative analytical approaches. Yes, ma'am. After Meridian City, I spent 2 years developing methods that could identify threats that didn't fit traditional patterns. The dynamic correlation analysis we're using now is the result of that work. Thompson leaned back in his chair, processing this new information. Why wasn't this included in your personnel file? Because it was classified under a compartmentalized program that was disbanded after the incident. The official position was that the analytical methods were too speculative for operational use. But you continued developing them anyway, Hawkins observed. Sarah met her gaze directly. I couldn't let what happened in Meridian City happen again. If there was a chance that improved analytical methods could prevent similar attacks, I had to pursue it. The secure communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Thompson read the encrypted text, his expression growing increasingly grave. The situation in Corvina is escalating. Intelligence reports suggest that the attacking force is moving toward population centers. We need analysis now, not next week. Sarah straightened, feeling the familiar surge of determination that had driven her through the darkest moments of her career. Sir, I need authorization to implement full dynamic correlation analysis. That means access to all available intelligence, streams, computational resources, and the authority to task other analytical units for specific information. That's well beyond your current authorization level, Thompson replied. General Hawkins intervened. Given the circumstances, I'm granting emergency analytical authority. Lieutenant Martinez, you now have access to any intelligence resources necessary to assess this threat. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and terror. This was the opportunity she had been preparing for since Meridian City, the chance to use her analytical capabilities to prevent catastrophic attacks, rather than simply document them afterward. But it also meant accepting responsibility for decisions that could affect thousands of lives. Thank you, ma'am. I'll need my team immediately, plus access to the base's secure computational facility and liaison with satellite reconnaissance units. Done, Hawkins replied. But I need results within 12 hours. The situation won't wait for perfect analysis. As Sarah prepared to leave, Thompson called her back. Lieutenant, one more thing. Your analysis of the Meridian City incident, was it accurate? Sarah hesitated, knowing that her answer would determine how much trust she would be given for the current crisis. Sir, every prediction I made about the attackers' capabilities, tactics, and objectives was confirmed by subsequent events. Problem wasn't with my analysis, it was with the institutional inability to accept that our understanding of threats was fundamentally incomplete. And you believe the same thing is happening now? I believe we're facing an adversary that operates beyond conventional threat parameters. The Corvanian situation isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that most analytical frameworks aren't designed to recognize. General Hawkins studied her with calculating eyes. Lieutenant, if you're right, then this crisis could be the beginning of a new kind of warfare. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Sarah thought about the civilians in Meridian City, the colleagues who had died because threats weren't recognized in time, and the sleepless nights she had spent wondering if she could have done more to prevent the attacks. Ma'am, I've been preparing for this responsibility for 3 years. I won't let the same mistakes happen again. As she left the command center, Sarah's mind was already racing through the analytical requirements ahead. The Corvanian situation was more complex than anyone had realized, and the attacking force demonstrated capabilities that suggested they were dealing with a threat that had been years in development. The dynamic correlation analysis would need to process multiple intelligence streams simultaneously, identifying patterns that existed across different domains of information. But first, she needed to confront her team with the reality of what they were facing. The theoretical analytical exercise had become an operational crisis, and their innovative methods would now be tested under conditions where failure meant more than professional embarrassment. It meant lives lost and strategic objectives compromised. Walk back to the intelligence building gave Sarah time to process the emotional weight of revealing her background. For 3 years, she had carried the burden of Meridian City alone, using the guilt and determination as fuel for developing better analytical methods. Now that private struggle had become public knowledge, and her credibility as a leader would be judged not just on her current performance, but on her ability to prevent the same failures that had haunted her past, her team was already assembling. In the main briefing room, responding to the emergency call she had sent 20 minutes earlier, Torres, Walsh, and Kim looked alert but concerned, understanding that pre-dawn meetings usually meant that routine assignments had become crisis management. The situation has changed, Sarah began without preamble. The Corvanian defensive preparations we've been analyzing are now under active attack. We're dealing with a real-time crisis that requires immediate analytical response. She activated the main display, showing satellite imagery of the ongoing attacks. The attacking force is using aircraft and weapon systems that exceed known capabilities. Our analysis may be the only framework that can help understand what we're facing. Torres studied the tactical display with growing alarm. Ma'am, the coordination pattern suggests advanced command control systems. This isn't an improvised attack, it's a carefully planned operation using technology we don't recognize. Walsh focused on the targeting patterns. The psychological impact is calculated for maximum disruption. They're not just destroying military targets, they're systematically dismantling the coalition's ability to coordinate defensive responses. Kim's technical analysis was equally disturbing. The weapon's effects don't match conventional explosives. These are precision strikes designed to achieve specific tactical objectives with minimal collateral damage. That suggests intelligence, capabilities that allowed them to identify exactly which targets to hit. Sarah felt the weight of leadership as she prepared to reveal the full scope of what they were facing. There's something else you need to know. 3 years ago, I was part of an intelligence task force that investigated similar attacks in an urban environment. The analytical methods we've been developing are based on lessons learned from that experience. Her team exchanged glances, understanding that they were about to hear something that would fundamentally change their understanding of the current crisis. Sarah took a deep breath and began to tell him about Meridian City, about the warnings that were ignored, about the development of analytical methods that could recognize threats that didn't fit conventional patterns. As she spoke, she watched her team's expressions evolve from surprise to understanding to determination. They were beginning to grasp that their innovative analytical approaches weren't just academic exercises, they were tools developed specifically to prevent the kind of catastrophic intelligence failures that had cost lives in the past. The transformation of the 47th Tactical Intelligence Unit was accelerating, driven by the reality that their experimental methods had suddenly become the military's best hope for understanding an unprecedented threat. The theoretical had become operational, and Sarah's hidden expertise was about to be tested under conditions where failure was not an option. The secure computational facility hummed with electronic activity as Sarah's team worked frantically to implement the dynamic correlation analysis under combat conditions. Banks of servers lined the walls, their processors straining under the computational load of processing multiple intelligence streams simultaneously. The room's temperature had risen noticeably as the systems pushed beyond their designed parameters, cooling fans spinning at maximum speed to prevent overheating. Neural network integration at 73%. Kim reported from his position at the central console, sweat beading on his forehead despite the facility's air conditioning. The correlation algorithms are identifying patterns, but the data volume is exceeding our processing capacity. Sarah moved between workstations, monitoring the real-time analysis as her team pushed their experimental methods to operational limits. The satellite feeds showed the attacks in Corvana continuing with mechanical precision, each strike perfectly timed to maximize disruption of defensive coordination. The pattern was becoming clearer, but the implications were more terrifying than she had anticipated. "Torres, what's the latest from Signals Intelligence?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders as he monitored communication intercepts. "The enemy communication signatures are unlike anything in our databases," he replied, his voice tight with concentration. "They're using quantum encryption protocols that shouldn't exist outside theoretical research. The frequency patterns suggest coordination between multiple command centers, but the geographic distribution is impossible." Walsh looked up from her behavioral analysis workstation, her expression troubled. "Ma'am, the targeting psychology is sophisticated beyond anything we've encountered. They're not just attacking military assets, they're systematically destroying the coalition's ability to maintain social cohesion. This suggests intelligence about cultural and psychological vulnerabilities that would require years of deep analysis to acquire." Sarah felt the familiar chill of recognition. The enemy wasn't just technologically advanced, they understood their targets at a level that implied long-term surveillance and analysis. "Show me the targeting progression." The main display shifted to show a chronological sequence of attacks, each one carefully chosen to create maximum cascading effects. Military communications were disrupted first, followed by transportation networks, then critical infrastructure that supported civilian populations. The sequence was designed to create panic, confusion, and the breakdown of organized resistance. This is psychological warfare combined with technological superiority, Sarah observed, her analytical mind processing the implications. They're not trying to occupy territory, they're trying to demonstrate that resistance is futile. Her secure phone rang with an incoming call from General Hawkins. Sarah answered immediately, knowing that interruptions during crisis analysis usually meant that the situation had deteriorated further. Lieutenant Martinez, we have a problem. The attacks in Corvana are spreading to adjacent regions. Intelligence suggests that the enemy force is larger than we initially assessed, and their capabilities appear to be expanding in real time. Sarah's stomach dropped. Ma'am, are you saying they're adapting their tactics based on our defensive responses? That's exactly what I'm saying. Every countermeasure we deploy is being neutralized within hours. It's as if they have access to our operational planning in real time. The implication was staggering. If the enemy could monitor and counter defensive measures as they were implemented, then conventional military responses would be ineffective. The technological advantage was so complete that traditional strategic thinking was obsolete. General, I need to expand our analytical scope. We're not just dealing with an advanced enemy, we're dealing with an intelligence capability that may exceed our own. Granted. You now have access to all available intelligence resources, including classified programs that you may not have known existed. Use whatever you need. As Sarah ended the call, she realized that the stakes had escalated beyond anything she had imagined. The enemy wasn't just attacking military targets, they were demonstrating a level of strategic intelligence that suggested they understood their opponents better than the opponents understood themselves. Team, we need to accelerate our analysis. The enemy is adapting faster than we can respond, which means they have intelligence advantages we haven't identified. Kim's fingers flew across his keyboard as he reconfigured the correlation algorithms. Ma'am, I'm detecting something strange in the attack patterns. The precision isn't just technological, it's predictive. They're hitting targets moments before defensive responses can be implemented. Torres nodded grimly. The communication intercepts support that assessment. Enemy forces are repositioning to counter defensive measures that haven't been deployed yet. Sarah felt the analytical pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. They're not just monitoring our communications, they're predicting our responses, based on psychological and strategic modeling. This isn't real-time intelligence, it's predictive analysis. Walsh's behavioral expertise added the final piece to the puzzle. MAAM, if they can predict our responses, then they understand our decision-making processes at a fundamental level. That suggests they've been studying our military culture, leadership patterns, and strategic doctrine for years. The room fell silent as the implications registered. They weren't facing an enemy with superior technology. They were facing an adversary that had spent years preparing for this specific conflict, studying their opponents with scientific precision, and developing countermeasures for every possible response. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. If they can predict our conventional responses, then we need to implement responses they can't predict. The dynamic correlation analysis gives us capabilities they may not have accounted for. But ma'am, Kim interjected, if they've been studying our analytical methods, then they may have developed countermeasures for those as well. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Every decision could be anticipated. Every strategy countered, every response neutralized. The enemy had achieved the ultimate strategic advantage, complete predictability of their opponent's actions. Her secure terminal chimed with an incoming priority message from the Pentagon. Sarah read the encrypted text with a growing alarm. The Secretary of Defense was requesting immediate assessment of whether the United States should consider direct military intervention in the Corvanian conflict. The Pentagon is considering military intervention, she announced to her team. They want to know if our forces can be effective against an enemy with these capabilities. Torres looked up from his workstation with a grim expression. Ma'am, based on what we're seeing, conventional military intervention would be catastrophic. The enemy would anticipate every tactical move and have countermeasures ready. Unless, Walsh added thoughtfully, we could implement strategies that fall outside their predictive models. Sarah felt a spark of possibility in the darkness of impossible choices. What if we could use their predictive capabilities against them? If they're modeling our responses based on established patterns, then unexpected responses might disrupt their entire strategic framework. Kim's technical mind immediately grasped the implications. You're talking about psychological warfare at the strategic level. Instead of trying to hide our intentions, we deliberately signal false intentions to mislead their predictive models. Exactly. But it requires perfect coordination and the ability to implement genuine surprise strategies that contradict everything they expect from us. Torres leaned back in his chair, processing the audacious scope of what Sarah was proposing. Ma'am, that level of deception requires capabilities that don't exist in current military doctrine. We'd be inventing new forms of strategic warfare while under active attack. Sarah stood before the main display, studying the real-time intelligence feeds that showed the systematic dismantling of the Corvanian coalition. The enemy was demonstrating capabilities that made conventional military responses obsolete. But their very superiority might also be their weakness. If they had become dependent on predictive modeling, then true unpredictability could be devastating. I need to speak with General Hawkins immediately, she decided. If we're going to implement this approach, it has to be authorized at the highest levels. The call to General Hawkins was brief but intense. Sarah outlined her assessment of the enemy's predictive capabilities and proposed a strategic response that would deliberately confuse their analytical models. The concept was so radical that it required fundamental changes to military doctrine and operational planning. Lieutenant, what you're describing is warfare at the level of strategic psychology. Are you confident that your analytical methods can support this approach? Sarah thought about Meridian City, about the lives lost because conventional thinking had failed to recognize an unprecedented threat. Ma'am, I'm confident that conventional approaches will fail against this enemy. The dynamic correlation analysis is our best tool for developing responses they can't predict. The risks are enormous. If your approach fails, we lose any chance of effective response. General, if we don't try this approach, we're guaranteed to fail. The enemy has demonstrated the ability to counter every conventional strategy. There was a long pause as General Hawkins considered the implications. Authorization granted, but I need a detailed implementation plan within 4 hours. This operation will require coordination between multiple agencies and complete operational security. As Sarah ended the call, she realized that she was about to attempt something that had never been tried in military history: the deliberate use of unpredictability as a strategic weapon. The success or failure of this approach would determine not just the outcome of the Corvanian conflict, but the future of warfare itself. Team, we're going to implement strategic deception at a level that's never been attempted. Our job is to create analytical frameworks that can generate genuinely unpredictable responses while maintaining operational effectiveness. The next few hours were a blur of intense activity as Sarah's team worked to develop the theoretical foundation for strategic unpredictability. The computational facility's servers strained under the load of processing multiple scenario models simultaneously, each one designed to confuse enemy predictive systems while maintaining tactical coherence. Kim discovered that the enemy's predictive models appeared to be based on game theory and probability analysis. sophisticated but ultimately dependent on rational decision-making assumptions. If we can introduce elements of controlled irrationality, their models might become unreliable. Torres identified specific communication patterns that could signal false intentions while maintaining operational security. We can use their own surveillance capabilities against them by providing misleading information that appears genuine. Walsh developed psychological profiles that could guide the implementation of deceptive strategies. The key is to make our deceptions believable, while ensuring they lead to incorrect predictive conclusions. As the 4-hour deadline approached, Sarah assembled their findings into a comprehensive strategy that would fundamentally change how military operations were conducted. The approach required perfect coordination, absolute operational security, and the willingness to implement tactics that contradicted established doctrine. The plan was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. If successful, it would neutralize the enemy's predictive advantages and create opportunities for effective resistance. If it failed, it would confirm that conventional military thinking was obsolete and that the enemy's technological superiority was insurmountable. Sarah prepared to present their findings to General Hawkins, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether her innovative analytical methods could provide solutions to impossible challenges. The theoretical approaches developed in response to past failures were about to be tested under conditions where the stakes couldn't be higher. The transformation of the 47th Tactical Intelligence Unit was reaching its critical moment. The experimental methods that had been viewed with skepticism were now the military's best hope for understanding and countering an unprecedented threat. Sarah's journey from underestimated analyst to strategic innovator was about to face its ultimate test. As she walked toward the command center with her team's analysis, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge she had faced, every doubt she had overcome, every innovative approach she had developed had prepared her for this crisis. The skeptics who had questioned her readiness for command were about to discover whether unconventional thinking could succeed where traditional approaches had failed. The impossible challenge was about to become the defining moment of her career and potentially the turning point in a new form of warfare that would reshape military thinking for generations to come. The operations center at Fort Braxton had been transformed into the nerve center for the most complex military coordination in history. Banks of monitors displayed real-time tactical situations across 4 continents, while secure communication links connected Sarah's team to military commands worldwide. The air hummed with electronic activity as Operation Mindbreak entered its critical phase, with American forces implementing strategic deception on a scale that defied conventional military doctrine. Sarah stood at the central command console, monitoring the synchronized chaos that had become the new face of warfare. Across the Pacific, Marine units executed seemingly random patrol patterns that were actually mathematical sequences designed to confuse enemy analytical systems. In the Atlantic, naval formations appeared to be conducting routine exercises while secretly coordinating for a massive strategic repositioning. European air bases launched sorties that followed flight paths, so complex that even their own pilots didn't understand the complete operational picture. "Ma'am, we're seeing significant disruption in enemy response patterns," Torres reported from his signals intelligence station. "Their communication traffic has increased by 300% as they attempt to analyze our operations. The predictive models appear to be generating contradictory tactical recommendations." Sarah felt a surge of cautious optimism. The strategic chaos was working exactly as her analytical models had predicted. By implementing coordinated unpredictability, they had overwhelmed the enemy's computational capacity to process and predict American responses. The technological advantage that had seemed insurmountable was beginning to crack under the pressure of genuine strategic innovation. "Walsh, what's your assessment of enemy decision-making patterns?" Sarah asked, moving to the behavioral analysis station where her teammate was processing psychological intelligence from the conflict zones. The enemy leadership is showing signs of strategic paralysis, Walsh replied, highlighting specific communication intercepts on her display. They're receiving contradictory intelligence about American intentions, and their decision-making process is becoming increasingly hesitant. The confidence they showed during the initial attacks has been replaced by uncertainty and defensive positioning. Kim looked up from his technical analysis workstation with barely contained excitement. Ma'am, the enemy's predictive algorithms are generating error cascades. They're spending so much computational capacity trying to analyze our deception patterns that their real-time tactical coordination is degrading. Sarah studied the global tactical display, watching as American forces implemented the most sophisticated strategic deception in military history. The operation required perfect timing and coordination, with thousands of individual actions combining to create patterns that appeared chaotic, but followed hidden mathematical relationships that only her correlation analysis could reveal. Her secure phone rang with an incoming call from Secretary Carson. Sarah answered immediately, knowing that contact from the Pentagon during active operations usually meant either extraordinary success or catastrophic failure. Lieutenant Martinez, I'm calling to inform you that Operation Mindbreak has exceeded all expectations. The enemy's advance has not only been halted, but they're beginning to withdraw from advanced positions. The Joint Chiefs want to know how long can we maintain this level of strategic complexity. Sarah glanced at her team's workstations, noting the strain lines around their eyes and the coffee cups that had accumulated over the past 18 hours of continuous operations. Mr. Secretary, the human factor is our limiting constraint. My team can maintain the current operational tempo for another 12 hours, but we'll need rotation cycles after that. Understood. I'm authorizing immediate expansion of your analytical team and establishment of redundant operational centers. This capability is too valuable to depend on a single unit. As Sarah ended the call, she realized that Operation Mindbreak's success had transformed not just the current conflict, but the entire future of military intelligence. The innovative analytical methods that had been viewed with skepticism a week earlier were now being recognized as revolutionary advances in strategic thinking. General Hawkins arrived at the operations center, accompanied by a delegation of senior officers from multiple agencies. The atmosphere was electric with excitement and professional respect as they observed the real-time implementation of strategic concepts that had never before been attempted. Lieutenant Martinez, General Hawkins began, her tone reflecting both admiration and amazement. What you and your team have accomplished here represents a paradigm shift in military capabilities. The Secretary of Defense has asked me to discuss your future role in expanding these analytical capabilities across all military branches. Sarah felt the weight of recognition settling on her shoulders alongside the responsibility she had been carrying for the past week. Ma'am, the success of Operation Mindbreak demonstrates the potential of dynamic correlation analysis. But scaling these methods will require fundamental changes to military training and operational doctrine. That's exactly what we want to discuss, General Hawkins replied. The Pentagon is establishing a new Strategic Innovation Command, and they're considering you for a leadership position that would oversee the implementation of advanced analytical methods across all military intelligence operations. The offer was staggering in its scope and implications. Sarah would be responsible not just for her small team, but for transforming how the entire military approached intelligence analysis and strategic planning. The analytical methods she had developed in response to past failures would become the foundation for a new generation of military capabilities. General, I'm honored by the consideration, but I need to ensure that my current team receives appropriate recognition for their contributions. Torres, Walsh, and Kim have been essential to every breakthrough we've achieved. General Hawkins nodded approvingly. Their promotions and assignments to the new command structure have already been approved. This operation has demonstrated the value of innovative thinking at every level. As the delegation prepared to leave, General Hawkins approached Sarah privately. "Lieutenant, I want you to understand the significance of what you've accomplished. Not only have you potentially changed the outcome of this conflict, but you've proven that innovative analytical approaches can overcome seemingly insurmountable technological disadvantages. The entire intelligence community will be studying your methods for years to come." The next few hours brought a steady stream of reports confirming Operation Mindbreak's continued success. Enemy forces were withdrawing from advanced positions across multiple theaters, their coordinated assault dissolving into confused defensive repositioning. The predictive capabilities that had made them nearly invincible were becoming liabilities. As they struggled to process contradictory intelligence about American intentions. But Sarah knew that success brought new challenges. The enemy would eventually adapt to strategic unpredictability, developing new analytical methods to counter deception-based warfare. The innovation cycle would continue, requiring constant development of new approaches to maintain strategic advantages. "Ma'am," Torres called from his workstation, "we're receiving reports that Allied forces are beginning to implement their own deception operations based on our tactical frameworks. The Corvanian coalition is using modified versions of our unpredictability algorithms to coordinate their resistance movements." Sarah smiled, realizing that Operation Mindbreak's influence was spreading beyond American operations. The strategic concepts her team had developed were becoming tools for any force facing technologically superior adversaries. The democratization of advanced tactical thinking was reshaping the global strategic landscape. Her secure terminal chimed with an incoming message from the White House. The President's National Security Advisor was requesting a personal briefing on the analytical methods that had enabled Operation Mindbreak's success. Sarah would be presenting her team's innovations to the highest levels of government, explaining how mathematical analysis and strategic psychology could combine to create new forms of military effectiveness. As the immediate crisis began to stabilize, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The skeptical reception she had received upon arriving at Fort Braxton seemed like a distant memory, replaced by recognition that innovation and unconventional thinking could succeed where traditional approaches had failed. "Team meeting," she announced, gathering Torres, Walsh, and Kim around the central planning table. "We need to discuss what comes next." Her three teammates approached with expressions that mixed exhaustion with professional satisfaction. They had been working at maximum intensity for over a week, pushing both themselves and their analytical methods to operational limits. But the success of their efforts was undeniable. They had fundamentally changed how military intelligence operated. "First, I want to acknowledge what each of you has contributed to this operation," Sarah began. "Torres, your signals intelligence analysis identified the enemy's predictive capabilities and provided the foundation for our deception strategies. Walsh, your behavioral analysis enabled us to understand how strategic psychology could be weaponized. Kim, your technical expertise made the computational requirements manageable and created the infrastructure that supported real-time coordination." She paused, ensuring that each team member understood their individual importance to the collective success. "The Pentagon is offering all of us positions in a new Strategic Innovation Command that will expand these analytical methods across all military branches. But I want your honest assessment. Are we ready for that level of responsibility?" Torres leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. "Ma'am, we've proven that our methods work under extreme conditions. But scaling to support global military operations will require capabilities we haven't developed yet." Walsh nodded thoughtfully. The psychological aspects become more complex when we're coordinating deception across multiple cultures and strategic contexts. We'll need much deeper understanding of behavioral patterns across different military organizations. Kim's technical perspective added another layer of complexity. The computational requirements for global-scale operations will push U.S. beyond current hardware limitations. We'll need to develop new algorithmic approaches and processing architectures. Sarah appreciated their honest assessment of the challenges ahead. All valid concerns. But consider the alternative if we don't take leadership of this expansion. Others will implement these methods without understanding their full implications or limitations. We have a responsibility to ensure that strategic innovation is developed safely and effectively. Her team exchanged glances, understanding that they were being offered the opportunity to shape the future of military intelligence for decades to come. The analytical methods they had developed in response to immediate crisis could become the foundation for a new generation of strategic capabilities. There's something else to consider, Sarah continued. The enemy's adaptation to our methods. They're already analyzing Operation Mindbreak, developing countermeasures for strategic unpredictability. Our next challenge will be staying ahead of their analytical capabilities, while expanding our own methods to support broader operational requirements. Torres's expression grew more serious. That's the real long-term challenge. Innovation cycles that accelerate with each iteration. We'll need to develop adaptive analytical frameworks that can evolve faster than enemy countermeasures. Which brings us back to the fundamental question, Sarah concluded. Are we prepared to accept responsibility for continuously revolutionizing military intelligence, knowing that the stakes will only increase with each success? The question hung in the air as her team contemplated the magnitude of what they were being offered. Leadership of strategic innovation for the world's most powerful military, with the responsibility to stay ahead of adversaries who would be working constantly to neutralize their advantages. Kim spoke first, his voice reflecting both confidence and determination. Ma'am, we've already proven that innovative thinking can overcome seemingly impossible challenges. I believe we have a duty to continue that work. Walsh nodded in agreement. The psychological aspects of strategic innovation fascinate me. The opportunity to develop a new understanding of how human behavior and mathematical analysis can combine for military effectiveness is compelling. Torres's response reflected the practical considerations that had made him invaluable throughout the operation. The risks are significant, but so are the potential benefits. If we can maintain our innovation advantage, we might be able to prevent conflicts through strategic deterrence rather than fighting them through superior force. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her team's thoughtful consideration of both opportunities and responsibilities. Then we accept the assignment. But we do it with full understanding that success will bring even greater challenges, and that the analytical methods we develop will shape military capabilities for generations. As they began planning for the transition to strategic innovation command, Sarah realized that the transformation of her career was entering a new phase. The junior officer who had faced skepticism about her readiness for leadership was about to become responsible for revolutionizing military intelligence across all branches of service. The recognition of her team's achievements was gratifying, but the new responsibilities were daunting. They would be working at the cutting edge of strategic innovation, developing analytical capabilities that could determine the outcomes of future conflicts before they began. Operation Mindbreak had proven that unconventional thinking could overcome technological superiority, but the next challenge would be institutionalizing innovation within military organizations that valued tradition and proven methods. Sarah's greatest test lay ahead, transforming revolutionary concepts into sustainable capabilities that could adapt and evolve in response to constantly changing threats. 2 years after, Operation Mindbreak transformed the nature of modern warfare. Colonel Sarah Martinez stood at the podium of the newly constructed Strategic Innovation Institute at Fort Braxton. The facility gleamed with cutting-edge technology and housed the brightest analytical minds from across the globe, all working to advance the revolutionary methods that had emerged from a week of crisis that changed everything. The auditorium was filled with military officers, intelligence analysts, and academic researchers from 37 countries, all gathered for the first international conference on adaptive strategic analysis. The transformation of military thinking that had begun with Sarah's small team had rippled across the global security landscape, fundamentally altering how nations approached conflict prevention and resolution. 3 years ago, conventional wisdom held that technological superiority was the ultimate determinant of military success. Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone whose innovations had reshaped strategic doctrine worldwide. Today, we understand that adaptive intelligence and strategic unpredictability can neutralize any technological advantage. In the front row sat her original team, now bearing the insignia of their elevated positions within the Strategic Innovation Command. Lieutenant Colonel Torres had become the world's leading expert in predictive signal analysis, developing methods that could identify enemy strategic intentions weeks before conventional intelligence detected any activity. Major Walsh led the Behavioral Strategic Analysis Division, training officers from allied nations in the psychological aspects of modern warfare. Captain Kim commanded the Technical Innovation Laboratory, where his work on dynamic correlation algorithms had spawned an entirely new field of computational military science. Behind them sat representatives from the Corvanian Coalition, including President Elena Vasquez, whose country had been the first to implement Sarah's strategic deception methods in a successful resistance campaign. The enemies who had once seemed invincible with their advanced technology were nowhere to be seen. Their predictive warfare capabilities had become liabilities when faced with truly adaptive opposition, leading to the collapse of their aggressive expansion and the dismantling of their technological military complex. The principles we discovered during the Corvanian crisis have applications far beyond military operations. Sarah continued, advancing to her next presentation slide. Adaptive analysis methods are now being used for pandemic response coordination, economic crisis management, and climate change mitigation. When we learned to think beyond predictable patterns, we opened new possibilities for addressing humanity's most complex challenges. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the Director of the United Nations Strategic Coordination Office, raised her hand during the question period. Colonel Martinez, how do you ensure that these powerful analytical capabilities are used responsibly? The same methods that prevented one conflict could theoretically be used to initiate others. Sarah had anticipated this question, understanding that revolutionary capabilities always raised ethical concerns. Dr. Chun, that's why the Strategic Innovation Institute operates under international oversight with mandatory transparency protocols. Every analytical method we develop is shared with allied nations, and our research is conducted through collaborative partnerships that prevent any single entity from monopolizing strategic advantages. The question led to a broader discussion about the democratization of advanced strategic thinking. Unlike previous military innovations that concentrated power in the hands of those with superior technology, adaptive analysis methods could be implemented by any organization with sufficient analytical expertise and computational resources. The result had been a global leveling of strategic capabilities that made large-scale conflicts increasingly difficult to sustain. Following the conference, Sarah found herself walking through the memorial garden that had been established to honor those lost in conflicts that might have been prevented through better strategic analysis. At the center stood a monument dedicated to the victims of the Meridian City attacks, including a plaque that bore the names of the 47 civilians whose deaths had motivated Sarah's relentless pursuit of innovative analytical methods. Never thanked you properly for what you did, came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see James Collins, the former major whose neural interface accident during Project Zenith had initially shaped her cautious approach to experimental technology. His recovery had been slow but remarkable, aided by the same computational advances that had enabled Operation Mindbreak's success. James, you don't owe me any thanks. Your experience taught me the importance of balancing innovation with safety. Protocols. Collins smiled, his expression reflecting both gratitude and professional respect. Sarah, what you accomplished went far beyond preventing my accident from being repeated. You proved that setbacks can become catalysts for breakthrough innovations, if we're willing to learn from them rather than being paralyzed by them. They walked together toward the research facilities where the next generation of analytical methods was being developed. The Strategic Innovation Institute had become a pilgrimage destination for military strategists worldwide, but it had also attracted philosophers, mathematicians, and social scientists who recognized that the principles underlying adaptive analysis had implications far beyond warfare. Tell me about the civilian applications, Collins requested as they passed laboratories where researchers worked on projects that ranged from disaster response coordination to international diplomatic negotiations. Sarah's expression brightened as she discussed the broader impact of their work. The adaptive correlation methods are being used to coordinate pandemic responses across multiple countries simultaneously. Instead of reactive measures, health organizations can now implement predictive interventions that adapt in real time to changing viral characteristics and population behaviors. They paused outside a laboratory where Dr. Walsh was training a team of international negotiators in the psychological aspects of conflict prevention. Through the observation window, they could see role-playing exercises where diplomats practiced adaptive communication strategies designed to prevent misunderstandings from escalating into larger conflicts. The most surprising application has been in environmental management, Sarah continued. Climate change response requires coordinating actions across multiple timescales and geographic regions. The same mathematical frameworks that enabled strategic military coordination are now helping coordinate global efforts to address environmental challenges. Collins nodded thoughtfully. You've essentially created tools for managing complexity at scales that were previously beyond human coordination capabilities. That's exactly right. The key insight from Operation Mindbreak wasn't just about military tactics. It was about developing analytical frameworks that could process multiple variables simultaneously and adapt to changing conditions faster than any individual human could manage. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Patricia Sterling, who had succeeded General Hawkins as commander of Strategic Innovation Command. Sterling approached with the bearing of someone accustomed to managing operations that spanned multiple continents and involved thousands of personnel. Colonel Martinez, we've received a request from the European Union for assistance with coordinating their economic response to the latest trade disruptions. They're asking for a team trained in adaptive analysis methods to help design policies that can adjust automatically to changing market conditions. Sarah felt a familiar surge of intellectual excitement. That's a fascinating application. Economic systems exhibit many of the same complexity characteristics as military operations, but the feedback loops operate on different timescales. The EU is offering to establish a permanent strategic innovation liaison office in Brussels if we can demonstrate effective results. This could be the beginning of routine international cooperation on complex problem-solving using our methods. As General Sterling departed to coordinate the international response, Sarah reflected on how far the field of strategic innovation had evolved from its origins in military crisis management. The analytical methods that had been developed to counter technologically superior enemies were now being used to address challenges that affected billions of people worldwide. The afternoon brought a visit to the Strategic Innovation Institutes. Advanced Simulation Facility, where researchers tested new analytical approaches in virtual environments that could model everything from global economic systems to planetary climate patterns. The computational requirements had evolved far beyond anything Sarah's original team had envisioned, but the fundamental principles remained the same: adaptive analysis that could process multiple variables simultaneously and adjust to changing conditions in real time. Captain Kim approached her in the main simulation chamber, where holographic displays showed complex mathematical models representing various global challenges. "Colonel, we've had a breakthrough in quantum correlation analysis. The new algorithms can process exponentially more variables than our previous systems, which means we can model entire global systems and predict intervention points where small changes could have large positive effects." Sarah studied the displays with growing excitement. "Show me the applications." Kim activated a global climate model that displayed atmospheric, oceanic, and economic data as interconnected systems. By identifying correlation patterns across multiple domains, we can predict where specific interventions, technological, policy, or behavioral, would have the greatest positive impact on overall system stability. The implications were staggering. The same analytical principles that had enabled military strategic innovation were now providing tools for addressing humanity's most complex global challenges. The mathematical frameworks developed to counter predictive warfare could be used to optimize international cooperation and resource allocation on unprecedented scales. "This represents the next evolution of strategic thinking," Sarah observed. "Instead of using analysis to gain advantages over opponents, we're using it to optimize collective outcomes for entire planetary systems." As evening approached, Sarah found herself in her private office, reviewing reports from strategic innovation teams operating across 6 continents. The small unit that had once struggled for recognition at Fort Braxton had grown into a global network of analytical specialists who applied adaptive methods to challenges ranging from refugee crisis coordination to space exploration planning. Her secure communication system chimed with an incoming call from the Secretary General of the United Nations. Sarah accepted the encrypted connection, knowing that such calls typically involved international crises that required immediate analytical intervention. "Colonel Martinez, we have a developing situation that requires strategic innovation capabilities. 3 nations are approaching conflict over resource allocation rights, and traditional diplomatic methods are proving inadequate. Can your teams develop adaptive negotiation frameworks that could prevent escalation?" Sarah consulted her global coordination display, which showed the current deployment of strategic innovation resources worldwide. "Mr. Secretary General, we can have a specialized team on site within 12 hours. The adaptive analysis methods are particularly effective for multi-party negotiations where traditional game theory approaches fail." "Excellent. This could be another demonstration of how strategic innovation can prevent conflicts rather than simply winning them after they begin." As the call ended, Sarah realized that the transformation of her career had reached a point she never could have imagined. The skeptical lieutenant who had arrived at Fort Braxton had become the architect of analytical methods that were reshaping how humanity addressed its most complex challenges. The evening's final task was reviewing applications from the next generation of strategic analysts who sought training at the Institute. Among the candidates were mathematicians from prestigious universities, behavioral psychologists who specialized in large-scale coordination, and military officers who recognized that future conflicts would be won through superior analysis rather than superior firepower. One application caught her attention, a young graduate student whose research proposal focused on applying adaptive correlation methods to interplanetary exploration planning. The scope of thinking that strategic innovation had inspired was reaching beyond Earth itself, as humans began to contemplate challenges that would require coordination across solar system distances and timescales measured in decades rather than months. Sarah smiled as she approved the application, understanding that the analytical revolution she had helped initiate would continue evolving long after her own career ended. The principles of adaptive analysis and strategic coordination had become tools for addressing any challenge that required managing complexity beyond individual human comprehension. The transformation was complete, but the journey continued. From a single week of crisis that had threatened to demonstrate the obsolescence of human strategic thinking, a new understanding had emerged that proved human creativity and analytical innovation could overcome any technological challenge. Memorial Garden outside her window was illuminated by soft lights that honored those whose sacrifices had motivated the pursuit of better analytical methods. But surrounding the memorial, the research facilities buzzed with activity as hundreds of researchers worked to develop tools that could prevent future conflicts and address challenges that had previously seemed beyond human coordination capabilities. Sarah Martinez had proven that leadership wasn't about conforming to established patterns, but about having the vision to see new possibilities and the courage to pursue them, even when conventional wisdom suggested they were impossible. The legacy of her strategic innovations would influence human decision-making for generations to come, transforming not just military operations, but humanity's approach to managing complexity at every scale. The woman who had once been told she'd never make captain had not only commanded the unit that won the war, she had fundamentally changed what victory meant in an interconnected world, where the greatest challenges required cooperation rather than conflict, and where the most powerful weapons were ideas rather than technologies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.